First up on our Mariners storylines, this idea came to light earlier this week on Monday, where we see Bryan Woo, despite a pitch count, manage 6 brilliant innings against the Oakland A's. And I thought we would check in on this. Lau, how have you seen Bryan Woo's evolution as a big league pitcher throughout these months that he's been up with the Mariners?
First thing that jumps out is his fastball. What all 5 of these Mariners starters have that's so unique about this rotation, all 5 of them have true fastball value. And Bryan Woo is certainly in that category. The run value that Woo has on both his 4-seamer and his sinker, aka a 2-seamer, the 2 pitch types are pretty similar, each are 3. So when a fastball is coming out of Bryan Woo's hand, the run value is 6, and positive run value for a pitcher means he is pitching well, and guys are not hitting him. So when Bryan Woo throws fastballs, it gives hitters nightmares. The biggest thing I've taken away is that Bryan Woo fastball, despite getting lit up in that first start against the Rangers, where we saw him leave a lot over the middle in his debut, we see now that this is a very, very upper echelon big league heater.
There's a really good segment that's probably still up on the MLB Network Twitter pages, probably on their Facebook page, probably on their YouTube as well, about the uniqueness of the slots of the Mariners. Because Lau mentioned, like, all 5 Mariners starters have fastball value. But the reason they all have fastball value, as MLB Network put it, and I thought this was brilliant, is that none of them are average in any way. The worst thing you can do is be average at something. So from like a release point, an extension point, a spin point, you don't want to be average in any of those senses because that's what most of the big league hitters see. But Bryan Woo is like the epitome of that, right? He's like the opposite. I think you're going to reference something about this, but I'll just start it. If you notice, like, what makes Bryan Woo so unique as a pitcher is how low he releases the ball. We see a lot about how high you can release the ball and how intimidating it is to have a ball come like straight down at you. But what about a ball like riding up? Because that's what Bryan Woo does so well. He almost like launches the ball up. It's not actually up because he's on a mound, but that low release angle that he has really works to his benefit. And we've kind of seen that. And it helps when you can mix 2 fastballs that move in completely different directions.
Him and Logan Gilbert are polar opposites in that way. Logan is very over the top. He gets right on top of you with his fastball. He's got the really long extension. Bryan Woo releases it from a pretty low point, but the actual stuff on it makes it near impossible to hit. So what they call induced vertical break, which is a fancy name for essentially fastball rise. Bryan Woo has next level fastball rise on his pitches. The break he gets on that fastball, aka the elevation and the rise, is about 15 inches. And between the low release angle and the high rising fastball, man, does it give hitters nightmares. And people, not just like fans who like watching Bryan Woo, but actual front office people, media people, analysts, they rave about Bryan Woo's heater because it's really unique and it gives hitters fits.
Here's something I'll propose. I'm looking at a Savant page and the thought pops into my head that, like, not many rookie Savant pages look like this. I can't really color it if you're watching on YouTube or listening on wherever podcast platform you're listening on. But his Savant page is better than George Kirby's was when he was a rookie. His Savant page is better than Logan Gilbert's was when he was a rookie. And I was thinking, okay, who's the best rookie pitcher this year? Who's going to be the best full season rookie pitcher? I think it's probably Tanner Bibby, right? You would say so in Cleveland. Well, unless you had any objections.
That's probably right. Tanner Bibby is, or I think it's actually said Bibby, but Bibby is, yeah. He has some shot to win Rookie of the Year. It's not a slam dunk, but he is very much in the mix.
So I was like, okay, so look at his. Bryan Woo blows his out of the water. Now, remember, all of these are expected, right? This is based on the quality of contact, not on the results. But regardless, I mean, Bryan Woo looks like someone who's like in his 3rd season. But he's 60 innings into his big league career, and in terms of total innings this year, I guess he's at 109, and which is another thing we'll talk about here in a little bit of his workload and how they're going to manage him going forward. But it's just marvelous to see that even coming off the injured list and being a little rusty and being on a pitch count, he still manages to actually mow down the A's lineup, which again isn't actually that much of an achievement, but we'll highlight it as well. I want to talk to you about his cutter, because that's a pitch he started highlighting more and more and more as the season has gone along. And we saw the most usage out of it on Monday versus the A's. He got his highest chase rate on it, over 50%, 55% to be exact, on Monday against the A's. And he's almost replaced his slider with that pitch. And I thought that was kind of interesting that he has turned his more sweeping slider into a cutter, which essentially acts as like a gyro bullet slider, and has been very effective and getting guys to chase as well.
Should continue to add more pitches. It is pretty remarkable. Sometimes you'll see guys do this, right? Just like how Logan Gilbert ditched his changeup. He preferred the splitter. Bryan Woo opts to go to the cutter. And he's got a big arsenal for a rookie, too. He didn't come in here. He's different than Bryce Miller in this way, too. We talked about how Logan Gilbert and Woo are different. Well, the two rookies are different, too, and Miller and Woo. Miller is very fastball dependent, and don't get us wrong, Woo will highlight his fastball. But Bryce Miller is really a two-pitch guy at this point. Bryan Woo's arsenal is very large, and he has added pitches like this cutter, which have proven to be very effective. I think people still believe there's some room for that cutter to grow, but when it's on, it's really, really good.
And I think about it this way. He just throws cutter pretty soft. It's not like a hard Corbin Burns cutter. But if you think about the direction those three pitches goes, his two-seam fastball / sinker runs to his arm side. His fastball, for the most part, like tiny bit of arm side run, but for the most part, it's a fastball. It goes up. It doesn't really move horizontally. But then his cutter moves towards his glove side. And if you think about someone throwing their pitches harder, right? You'd say, okay, so Bryan Woo has a fastball that he now essentially throws to the glove side. He has a fastball that rises and goes up. And he also has a fastball that goes to his arm side and goes in. And those were his three primary pitches on Monday. And it was about as effective as we've ever seen. That might not be his repertoire every single start, but he's shown that he's pretty comfortable with those pitches, and it allows for a little bit more consistency when you're dealing with less break on all of your pitches. You can throw more strikes, and as we mentioned, you will say, well, Bryan Woo needs to work on his command. Well, what better way to work on your command than if you know you have a better idea of where your pitches are going, like he did on Monday.
So just as a refresher for people who don't remember the final line on Monday, Bryan Woo against the A's went 6 innings, 3 hits, no runs, 1 walk, 5 strikeouts. Now, there's people out there that will think to themselves when they see fastballs watching on TV, oh, you got to sit on the fastball, wait for the fastball, take advantage of the heater. Well, when you're Bryan Woo and you have a fastball that moves straight, a fastball that breaks to his right, and a fastball that breaks to his left, that's not an easy task for hitters to try and figure out, because if you see a straight fastball and then all of a sudden it just moves right at the end of the pitch, there's no preparing for that. This is why it gives guys fits. He has essentially 3 different fastballs like you outlined, and you don't know which way it's going.
And let me clarify. Again, I used it in a general sense. His cutter's really not like a true fastball, but it is a harder pitch. I mean, he throws it in the upper 80s. So it's close enough. It does drop quite a bit. It's 30 inches of drop on it, which is very similar to his slider. The only difference, again, between those two pitches is that his cutter only breaks 4 inches to his glove side, opposed to, I think it was 13 inches for his slider. So that's interesting. But I thought it was an interesting case study on Monday because using primarily those 3 pitches, he ends up throwing 15 of 20 first pitch strikes and 1 3-ball count in the question of, yeah, you know where your stuff is going. And the data point we got on Monday kind of shows that. Now, if you look on the other side, if you look at his slider, he's throwing his slider less. If you line up, you can go on Baseball Savant and look at pitch percentages of your cutter game by game this season, and you look at pitch percentage of your slider game by game this season. Not a perfect straight line, but his cutter overall has trended down. His cutter has trended up in usage. His slider, yeah, loss of words there. His slider has been moving down. It's down in pitch percentage per start. And then his chase rate overall for his cutter as well, as he's thrown it more, has continued to go up. So I think that's a pretty positive development for Bryan Woo if he's really feeling comfortable with his repertoire. Again, I think back to Logan Gilbert's rookie season. He hated throwing his off-speed pitches because he had no command of them. He didn't know where they were going, and they really weren't effective strikeout pitches. He'd become so fastball reliant. Well, now Bryan Woo has a pitch that's not necessarily his fastball that he's comfortable throwing, and it's effective. It's just so much more advanced than what we saw from Logan Gilbert as a rookie. I mean, even you could say to some sense George Kirby. George Kirby's stuff, as we mentioned this year, is infinitely better this year than it was last year. He did have his times last year where he just couldn't miss bats as often. It's not the problem this year for George, and Bryan is showing that now as a 23-year-old. Pretty impressive.
Did you hear the story they were talking about with Trent Blank and Bryan Woo on the broadcast on Monday?
No.
So this was a great story. So Trent Blank, who is the Mariners, to give him the exact correct terminology, he is the director of pitching for the Mariners. And they were talking about that 2021 draft class where they drafted Bryan Woo in the 6th round. A lot of people thought that was way too high to be taken Woo because he did not throw a lot of innings. His numbers on paper were not good at Cal Poly, and he had injury problems. People thought that was a bit of a stretch to go take him in the 6th round. Well, if you ask Trent Blank, he said, if I had the first pick, 1-1, I'm taking Bryan Woo in that draft. He said, I am taking Bryan Woo at number 1 overall in 2021 because they absolutely fell in love with all the stuff and the numbers that were just blowing up their radars when they saw him in college. Now, they didn't take him in the 1st round. They settled and took him in the 6th, but here he is looking like he's looking right now. And we'll see where he progresses forward because there's a lot of people that believe Woo's upside could be in the top end of this rotation, maybe ahead of guys like Bryce Miller.
I do raise my eyebrow to that just a little bit, but their bet has paid off. They did believe in him as a big leaguer, and he has performed. So they were right. They were right on that. Maybe not 1-1. That might be a stretch.
Well, Trent Blank doesn't get to make the pick, to be fair. That's just what he said. He loved Woo that much that's when he wanted him. He said, if it was up to me, that's what I'm doing.
What are they going to do with his workload? So he's at 109 innings. We're nearing up on a stretch. As of recording this, there's going to be an off day tomorrow. And then when this episode publishes, they're going to start a 13-game stretch with no off days in the start of September, where I believe there are only 2 off days after tomorrow. There will only be 2 off days the rest of the season. How are they gonna balance this?
So Scott Service talked about this on Tuesday in his media session. They did say that they're going to monitor it. They did say they're going to keep a close eye on it. If you saw Bryan Woo get pulled after 6 innings the other night when his pitch count was really low, this would explain why. First off, the Mariners were torturing the A's in that game. It was a blowout, and they decided this is a perfect opportunity to get Woo off his feet and keep his pitch count down. Now, what they do on this road trip, it's probably a possibility. They skip one of his starts. He was also just on the IL, just as a way to make sure he is not overworking himself. They do have Luke Weaver, who made the spot start on Tuesday. If they need somebody to fill in again for Woo, they have someone. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we know that Bryan Woo is on an innings limit. He hasn't been shut down, which is great for the Mariners' sake because he's been so useful for him. But if he's not going to get shut down, they're probably finding unique ways to just plug and play him a little bit to make sure he's not getting overworked. And part of that might be missing a start on this upcoming road trip.
I do think it's interesting that they say innings limit because he's whatever limit they had probably set preseason, he's already passed it. I guarantee that. Mm-hmm. Like he's more doubled than his innings than he had last year. More than doubled. And that just doesn't happen. But we saw the same thing with Kirby down the stretch last year. I mean, they monitor him a little bit in August, but like once they needed him in September, I mean, he was still full go for the most part. So I'm curious. I would say the final couple weeks of the season, he's probably gonna have the training wheels off. Like because they're gonna need him. Like they gotta win these games still, right? They're looking out for Bryan Woo, but they also gotta win these games. So responsibly, they're gonna put him out there and they're just gonna let him pitch. I have a hard time seeing them actually shutting him down or anything. I mean, it might be one start where he goes 3 innings. I would say he piggybacks. He goes 3. Luke Weaver goes 2 or 3, and then the bullpen takes the rest, right? I think that's probably would be, especially now that the rosters are expanding, you can afford to do that a little bit more.
Yeah, and look, Kirby didn't have the injury problems that Bryan Woo had, but you look at the last 10 games, all against the Astros and Rangers, and you don't need us to tell you that the Astros and Rangers are neck and neck with the Mariners in this AL West race, and every game's going to matter. That the last 10 games may decide the season. So they're going to need their full rotation going and at the top of their game, and that includes Bryan Woo. I do want to give one little last shout out here to this really good article from Pitcher List. Shout out to Jack Foley that wrote it. If we haven't sold you enough on just how much people believe in Bryan Woo's stuff, The headline of this article is Bryan Woo's repertoire is the blueprint for modern pitching. Yeah, the blueprint. And basically what this article gets into, without reading every detail, is that while he does need to work on command, he is so far and removed from the old school pitcher type, the hit your spots, throw strikes, pinpoint command type guy. He is a guy that has ridiculous stuff. In fact, they headline in this article, or they outline that they don't believe he actually has pure stuff to improve on. Like, they think his stuff is all there. It is just about refining some of his pitches and crisp and making sure that command is crisp moving forward. But they outline with all of his pitches just how good and effective it can be. And they basically believe his future has just sky high limitations.
That's crazy. Like, just remember, Bryan Woo hasn't even pitched 200 innings since college.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that. He hasn't.
That's how much people love his stuff, and they outline it with all these pitches. Again, you can check out this Jack Foley article on Pitcher List, just detailing what makes Bryan Woo so unique, because there are not many like him, especially with the stuff he possesses and how many pitches he can throw. The Mariners got a good one. They got a really good one in Bryan Woo.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to read that article. Glad you pointed that out.